One of the skills that you'll be learning in the nurse aid class is how to take an accurate blood pressure. I'm going to show you a little bit about actually reading the gauge of the blood pressure cuff in this video. We'll get to the specifics of the actual skill, putting the cuff on and closing the valve, pumping up the needle in a separate video. You'll be using an aneroid cuff, just your standard blood pressure cuff. I have two sizes here to show you. This is a standard cuff, or standard size cuff, and this is an extra large cuff. And you'll need to look at your patient and make a judgment on what size cuff you'll need for them. As I said, this cuff will fit most adults, and it has some markings in here that show you this will fit someone with an arm that small, to an arm that large. If someone had an arm larger than this, then you would need to move to the extra large cuff. If you look at the gauge, which is, this is just a blown up version of the gauge that's on the cuff, you see the word sphygmomanometer here. That's the technical term for your blood pressure cuff. You can just call it a blood pressure cuff. You also see down here mmHg, which stands for millimeters of mercury. That's the unit of measurement that you're using. Although there's not actually mercury in the cuff, that's still the unit of measure that's used. You don't have to label your cuff as, or I mean your number as mmHg when you get it though. You see that you have a scale here like you did with weight, and like you have with your graduate, and like you have with your height bar. You have a scale that's marked off in even increments, and you have numbers. Some of the markings are numbered and some of them are not. So you have 20, 40, 60, 80, on around to 300 that are marked, are labeled. Then you have these long marks in between, like between 20 and 40, that would be 30. That would be 50. That would be 70, 80, 90, 100, 110, 120, 130, 140. What you're going to do when you start taking a blood pressure is you are going to pump up until the needle is between 160 and 180. Most of your patients will have a blood pressure that the top number, which is called the systolic number, will be below 180. So you're going to pump up between 160 and 180, and you're going to start down. You're going to open your valve and start down, and at some point you will hear your first thump. So let's say that you go to 180 and you start down, and let's say you hear your first thump here at 140. Then your top number is 140. You'll continue to hear your thump as you go down. It will start to fade at some point, and then eventually it will be gone. So let's say that you started hearing your thump at 140, it faded and was gone at 80, then that means your patient's blood pressure is 140 over 80. One of the things that students have to get used to when they're reading the gauge is that as you're coming down, the numbers are going backwards. So this is 140, and then the short line below 140 is 138. The short line, this would be 130, and the short line, two short lines below that would be 126. Okay. Now, if you put the cuff on and you pump up between 160 and 180, let's say you pump up to 180, you open your valve and immediately you hear a thump. Then that means that the person's top number is above 180. You'll need to deflate the cuff, reapply the cuff, deflate the cuff, take it off, reapply it, and pump up your next time to 200. If you still hear a thump immediately when you open your valve at 200, you need to get the nurse. A nursing assistant would never pump up above 200. But maybe you open it and you don't hear it at 200, and you're going down and then you hear it, let's say right here. Then that person's top number would be 188. Now sometimes you'll start here at 180, you open, the needle's coming down and you don't hear anything. And you get down to 120, you still don't hear anything, you still don't hear anything, you still don't hear anything. Just keep listening until you hear that top number. you can't have a predetermined notion about what someone's blood pressure is going to be. You may have a patient with a blood pressure of 80/40. So you may be listening and you don't hear anything until you get to 80. Or it could even be lower than that. So just continue to listen till you hear your first thump. That's your top number. That patient would have a blood pressure of 80/42. Never have a preconceived notion of what you're going to hear, and never adjust numbers so that they're more in line with what's normal. And you'll see what's considered a normal range in your book, and we'll talk about that in class. The reason that we check a person's blood pressure is because we want to know what it is, not what it ought to be. So if everyone's blood pressure was normal, we wouldn't need to take it. So don't make up numbers, don't adjust numbers. Just pump up between 160 and 180, start down, listen for your first thump, listen to where it fades, and then write down the number accurately. And as I said, we'll cover the mechanics of taking the blood pressure in a later video.